It's the first G20 summit on the African continent taking place in South Africa. But there'll be one empty chair, that of the US President Donald Trump. He's refusing to attend over widely discredited claims that white people are being persecuted in the country. Will Trump be missed, or is this a chance for other world leaders to step up? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, debt, inequality and climate finance are just some of the issues to be discussed at South Africa's G20 summit. Trump said it was a total disgrace that the African country was hosting the meeting and has decided not to attend or send any US officials. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa responded by saying that boycott politics does not work.
In Johannesburg, preparations to host the world's most powerful economic players at the G20 summit is underway, a moment of international prestige for the African continent. But the build-up has been overshadowed by a dramatic snub from the US President Donald Trump.
I won't be going this year. It's in South Africa. I won't be going.
He went on to explain why on social media. It is a total disgrace that the G20 will be held in South Africa. Afrikaners are being killed and slaughtered, and their land and farms are being illegally confiscated. No US government official will attend as long as these human rights abuses continue.
Death, death, death.
It's a claim Trump brought up when South African President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the White House in May this year. South Africa has slammed the allegations, saying they are not substantiated by fact. President Ramaphosa says the US's refusal to attend the G20 is regrettable. Relations between the two countries are also strained due to South Africa's pro-Palestinian stance, underscored by its International Court of Justice case against Israel concerning allegations of genocide in Gaza.
It is unfortunate that the United States decided not to attend the G20. All I can say in my experience in politics is that boycotts never really work.
For those attending the summit, its agenda is extensive, but the key focus will be on stabilizing a fragile global economy, particularly the debt crisis impacting poorer countries. Leaders will also prioritize climate financing and the energy transition. And for the first time, the G20 will attempt to establish common ground on artificial intelligence. The United States is hosting the event in Miami next year, so South Africa will be unable to do the traditional G20 handover. And with US leadership absent, how much economic progress can be made at the summit?
Well, let's speak first to Ebrahim Rasool. He's the former South African ambassador to the United States. Joins me here in the studio. Ebrahim, great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
How worrying is it from a diplomatic perspective that the United States has fallen out with South Africa?
Ordinarily, it's very worrying if a superpower has you in its crosshairs and makes allegations, tells lies about you, and then punishes you on the basis of those lies with tariffs, with aid cuts, and with trade cuts, like the African Growth and Opportunities Act. So ordinarily, we should be worried if we are the sole focus. But we have an equal opportunity bully. And so he is, by and large, falling out with the whole world, threatening Nigeria, threatening Canada, speaking down to Europe. And really, I think that gives you a little bit of comfort that you are not the sole victim of the superpower, but that you are amongst others, and therefore the basis of gathering the others together, mobilizing them in defense of what is right, is the comfort in it all. But I think that the thing that is the second comfort is that the lies are so outrageous about the white genocide, white land confiscation. The demand is so unreasonable about drop your case, against Israel in the ICJ, when the whole world sees the genocide, that you begin to believe that the policy of America first may soon become America alone.
And tell me, Ibrahim, we've seen South Africa really step up globally in the last few years. You mentioned the case against Israel at the ICJ. Your country's providing leadership.
I think that, and it's the kind of moral leadership. We don't come from a sense that we are an economic superpower. We don't come from a sense that we are a military superpower. We are absolutely aware of our vulnerability to corruption and so forth. But you know what? The Palestinians have given us a way to be good and to regain our morality. And therefore, as the last victims of white supremacism in the world, we can recognize when a people are buckling under supremacism, whether it is white supremacism as in South Africa or Zionist supremacism as in Palestine. And when we recognize that, we hesitated only a bit, waiting for the neighbors to come to the defense of the Palestinians and in defense of Gaza. And when we didn't see that happening, something moved within our soul as the last victims of white supremacism, and we went to the ICJ. And we didn't go to the ICJ with a heart full of solidarity simply, or a heart full of rage. We went there with a case. And we feel very vindicated today that we have not yet won that case in the ICJ, but we have won it in the court of public opinion, that citizens of the world are rising up to push their governments to recognize Palestine, to stop the genocide, and to make sure that Palestinians get treated fairly.
Ibrahim, how significant is it that this G20 is on African soil? There must be a lot of pride in South Africa.
There is enormous pride in South Africa. There is enormous hope across Africa, because South Africa's leadership in 2025 of the G20 was, in a sense, African leadership. Because for the first time, the African Union is invited to be at the table, not to be spoken about, but to speak. And that is our pride and joy. It is just absolutely dastardly that the United States chooses to boycott the African G20, chooses to pick a fight with South Africa, and chooses to malign Africa at this moment when we are making enormous sacrifices for the world. For example, in the way in which we are sitting on mountains of coal, but we are refusing to burn them and rather choosing to bail out the West, bail out the North by adopting expensive, clean and green energy as we go through our industrial revolution.
Tell me, how excited are you for what you're seeing from the Global South? Last couple of years, rising prominence, better economies, and people talking about the Global South.
I think the thing about this G20 that is meeting in South Africa and that Donald Trump has by and large spat on is that it is the fourth iteration of Global South leadership of the G20. Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. We really hope that this will be the moment of arrival where we can seriously put up for debate on the agenda the issue of global governance reform, of global financial architecture reform, and to really make the case for the Global South. How do you restructure debt to get least developed economies out of trouble? How do you overhaul the credit rating system so that Africa doesn't pay 9% interest rates when it borrows money from the World Bank and Europe continues to pay 3%? How do you make sure that development is on the agenda and that we are resilient against disasters of droughts, of floods, of fires, and so forth? That's what we were hoping. How do we make sure that Brazil's agenda of food security continues, that India's agenda of green energy continues, etc.? And so we think that this is a momentous moment for the Global South, and therefore the disappointment is proportionate to the expectations we've had about the impact of the Global South.
Ibrahim Rasool, thanks for joining us on Roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's meet our panel for this one. I'm delighted to say joining me from Johannesburg in South Africa is Marissa Lorenzo. She's an independent political analyst. Minneapolis in the United States, we have Amy Koch. Amy is a Republican strategist. And in Cambridge, in England, Matthew Agrawala, Bennett Chair of Sustainable Finance at the University of Sussex. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Marissa, to you first of all, no President Trump, no American officials, and that's no problem, says Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to derail the whole G20 summit, but I think that it points to a much larger concern, which is that for most of this year, the South African government has been trying to iron out a more favorable deal with the US. And, it keeps telling us that, things are going to be sorted, talks are progressing well. And then something like this happens, and the US doesn't even attend the G20 when it's supposed to be handed over to it after South Africa hosts it. And it kind of just shows that the state of the relations between the two is really, really quite poor, and it doesn't look set to improve in the near term at all.
Amy, just come in on the state of relations then. President Trump, he really doesn't like this South African leader. He doesn't like South Africa. What's the problem?
Right. Well, I mean, he's got some concerns about human rights violations. He's expressed those. The South African government says that that he's making statements that are false and attacks on different farmers that the president cites are actually more criminal based, not race based. But I think Marissa is right. It just goes to prove that the South African government has, whatever they're saying on the surface, I think it does matter that the United States is not here. And it does point to a frayed relationship that, Trump speaks sometimes loudest when he's not even in the room. He knows that. He knows his negotiating power goes up sometimes with just silence or putting off a meeting. And that it strikes me that that's what's happening here. He wants South Africa to come with whatever they're offering or whatever they're working on is not good enough, and he wants them to come with a better deal to the table.
Thanks, Amy. Matthew, it's quite a strange look, isn't it? A G20 in the United States saying we're not traveling, we're not interested, we don't like you. I mean, it's a very Trumpian way of doing business.
I think it's a reflection of America's rapid retreat from the global stage. I think the United States has decided that it does not want to be a leader and cannot hold that position anymore, whether that's through the G20, whether it's through leadership through NATO, through OECD, or through any of the other global mechanisms or institutions. The US is actively retreating with one hand and undermining with the other. But really, I don't think that makes as big a difference for a group as broad as the G20. I mean, really, is there a leader internationally who, when the cameras are turned off and the microphones are quiet, would really say, oh, thank heavens, Trump is here? Maybe there's one or two. But mostly, the US has retreated, and governments around the world are going to have to move forward without them. It creates a vacuum, I think, where other countries are going to have to step in. And particularly in Africa, we have seen that China has become the leader in lending and in technology transfer and in international trade. So it's not the United States show. The fact that Trump's not there is good for some headlines, perhaps. Maybe Amy thinks there's some sort of negotiation strategy there for the South African economy, not a major trading partner for the United States. But mostly, I think it's just further evidence that America is retreating from the global stage.
Amy, is Matthew right? Is the United States retreating?
No, I think the United States is not retreating. I think it's regrouping and finding different allies. We've got Saudi Arabia at the White House, which if you'd have told me 2 years ago that was going to happen, I would have been surprised. And so I do think this is truly how this president and this administration negotiates. It's not even the fact that he's not there. There's not any U.S. officials attending. We've heard the same from the State Department and Secretary of State Rubio. I think that this is what we're talking about. I disagree that the rest of the G20 is going to say, well, we're so glad the United States is not at the table. I think it will be a major topic of conversation. And, again, this Trump administration they don't necessarily like to negotiate in a group. They kind of prefer to go one by one and talk to different countries and individually make deals. So this is, I don't think, a retreat. I think it's just how this administration negotiates.
Thank you, Amy. Marissa, I just want to address the issue of what President Trump has said about South Africa. He believes he's used the word genocide. He's not used that word in relation of Gaza. He has used the word genocide about white Afrikaner farmers losing their land to black people in South Africa. That's the issue here, isn't it? Just address that for us. Is Trump in any way correct about the issue?
No, not at all. I mean, this, I think, is one of the biggest pieces of misinformation or disinformation that is coming out about this. I mean, there's categorically no form of white genocide in South Africa. I know that Trump continues to push this. It's obviously enormously frustrating for those of us, Olivia, those of us who are South African, to hear this being said. South Africa has a lot of issues, but a white genocide is not one of them. Trump also has an issue with our race-based procurement laws, which we call broad-based Black economic empowerment. That itself is also a debate within South African society about if their application has been useful or not in the last almost 3 decades. But that's not really something, you know, that Trump can necessarily wade into or comment on. It's a South African issue to deal with. But certainly he's been zeroing in on that BEE legislation and then these myths of a white genocide. And I mean, it's really unfortunate. I don't think so. You know, from where I stand, the South African government has a very incoherent foreign policy, and this has not helped relations with the US for many, many years already. And this is our fault. But South Africa has never been under so much pressure in the democratic era from the US. And it's very, very difficult to respond to and to handle, especially when it's not based on any actual evidence. Like I said, there is no white genocide in South Africa.
So, Marissa, how frustrating is it, do you think, for your government to have this level of misinformation constantly being pumped out by the Trump administration?
I think it's hugely frustrating, but not necessarily that it is coming from Trump. I think it's frustrating because it is coming from civil rights groups within South Africa that have been lobbying with the Trump administration and pushing a certain kind of narrative. With that said, again, I do believe that the government, you know, and especially trying to get a more favorable trade deal, has not really been doing enough on its side. So I understand it is frustrating to deal with, but I also think that we have also need to be better prepared to come to the table to fight these claims. You know, so for example, when Ramaphosa went to the White House in May, you know, and Trump showed him some photos that allegedly point to, you know, the white genocide, specifically of white Afrikaans farmers. He seemed to be surprised by that picture and he said he didn't know what it was. And, you know, that just looks like a president who's unprepared. And I think that as much as the Trump administration is doing what it's doing, we also need to come to the table and say, okay, well, we can actually push back against this narrative. But I think ultimately our incoherent foreign policy doesn't help because we can't really decide if we want the US to be our friend or to be our enemy or not. We keep sort of changing sides and can't get to consensus on that.
Thanks, Marissa. Matthew, on a positive note, how big a deal is it having the first ever G20 summit on African soil?
I think it's exciting. Sub-Saharan Africa is where a huge amount of the global population growth is going to come from. It's where a huge amount of the future educated workforce is going to come from. Just for the record, there will be more children educated in Africa over the rest of this century than in the entire rest of the world combined. And if we are talking about a global economy that is moving towards services, towards knowledge-intensive, capital-intensive production, then that is a huge opportunity for investment across the subcontinent. And I think it is really interesting and exciting now to see that global bodies like the G20 are hosting events there. The challenge, of course, though, is that the G20 doesn't have a fantastic track record and sort of seems at the moment to be a bit of an organization in search of a mission. The goal, the purported purpose of this organization is that it's a forum for finance ministers and economics ministers from around the world of the largest economies to come together and discuss the challenges and coordinate on policies. But when we see that the G20 has coordinated on policy in the past, it's actually been pretty catastrophic. The best organization they achieved was in the 2010 round, where they agreed that the world's largest economies should all pursue aggressive austerity at the same time, shrinking global economic output and government demand. It took us over a decade to start to recover from that. So the G20 coming to Africa might be nice for the African economies, but the G20 itself needs to get its act together and start moving towards an organization that can help enhance productivity, help enhance trade relationships, and help improve financial stability around the world. And so far, on those three, it's largely failed.
Thank you. Amy, Matthew hinted earlier on at, America losing influence and China steaming in, forging alliances, very influential now in Africa. Is that a concern that the USA is losing a foothold in many strategic places?
Well, yes, and it should be. And so I'm less concerned about not attending the G20 because I happen to agree with Matthew that the group itself has sort of lost its way and the efficacy of the group is somewhat in question in my mind. But that doesn't negate the fact that the U.S. should be have a strategic plan for the continent of Africa. They should be working with allies and partners and finding more in the continent and doing that work. It doesn't need to go through the G20, but it should be happening. It needs to be happening.
Thank you, Amy. Marissa, I want to talk about the issue of debt in Africa. Many African countries are spending more servicing debt to countries like the United States and China and elsewhere than they can actually afford on healthcare and education. That needs to be a priority this time round, doesn't it?
It does, yes. But, every few years this issue is raised and then, the world gets together and we try to figure out what can we actually do about the debt problem, mostly in emerging economies. Obviously, most African economies are still emerging economies. And this is always a little bit frustrating because, yes, we can speak about how African governments tend to have, a higher premium on the debt that they pay. So then obviously the debt servicing cost gets higher and higher over time. But, there have been various measures to try to address this. So the IMF introduced the common framework back during COVID. It didn't work out so well. The test case in Africa was Zambia. So we constantly need to rethink this. But I think the problem is that with these kind of frameworks, we're trying to treat Africa as a monolith, but we don't find African governments really committed to working together across the board to push back. And unfortunately, we're going to be divided on this or only treat these issues separately when they affect our countries individually. We're not going to be able to push back or put forward a kind of common framework.
Matthew, with no President Trump present and President Xi not traveling as well, does this G20 represent an opportunity for Europe and the European Union to kind of push itself further in terms of advancement with African nations?
I think it could, although it's not clear to me that Europe is in a particularly strong position at the moment to be making friendly fiscal gestures in other parts of the world. We see a similar retreat from the global stage across many of the European economies as well. We see this increasingly in the United Kingdom with reform. We see it in Germany. We see it in Italy. These are not always places that we would look to.
Thanks, Matthew. Amy, do you worry that we're seeing something of a shift in global power at the moment, China having so much of it and G20, your country not even being there? Are you concerned that Trump is pushing people away from the USA?
I'm just not seeing a lot of evidence of this. When everyone, and the tariffs continue and sort of all those negotiations, it's not how we have traditionally done business. But I do, I see some pluses. I see some things that he's negotiated with, our friends in Europe, with Great Britain, with other countries. Again, as I said, the Crown Prince, MBS, is in town in DC. And I think that he is negotiating in a different way. But ultimately, he seeks to make deals around the globe, and it is a different approach, but it's not one that I necessarily that I disagree with. I actually think I disagree more with his domestic policy than I do his foreign policy. I think that in large part he's had some good successes there, and I don't think it's a matter of pulling back or retreating. I think it's a matter of approaching it different. And the global infrastructure has a pattern to it, has a sense of this is how we do things, and that just gets thrown out the window with this president. That's not how you can never apply those things. And I think that the world is learning a different way to negotiate with the United States.
Thanks, Amy. Marissa, final point to you. What do you think will be the legacy of this G20 summit, the first ever in Africa?
Well, hopefully Ramaphosa will be successful in kind of elevating Africa as a whole in this. And I think that that's something that's actually been quite important for him. For example, he's been a really big advocate of the African Union getting a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, for example. I think he's going to use the platform to say, to really highlight this is the first G20 in Africa to put Africa's needs, Africa's agenda on the map in terms of the common problems that we do have. Hopefully there comes out a way forward, greater cooperation and greater solidarity, especially from other African states. But I think that will be the focus. What does it mean to have an African country hosting the G20 for the first time, and how can we use this to our benefit?
Marissa, Amy and Matthew, thank you all so much for your insight on this one. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.